The topic is understanding custom resource definition, custom controller with respect to Kubernetes. Custom resource. A custom resource is an object that we create in Kubernetes that isn't part of the standard installation. It is essentially a piece of structured data, usually YAML, that represents a specific configuration or state we want to achieve. The analogy: if a standard pod is a default form provided by the government, custom resource is a custom form we design ourselves to track something specific. The purpose: it allows us to store and retrieve our own data using Kubernetes API kubectl. So the concept of custom resource definition and custom controller is to know that there exist default or standard resources provided by Kubernetes. For example, there exist replica set, there exist ingress, there exist services, and there exist few more services or resources that are already part of the Kubernetes environment. So there are services like argo, and this is not all resource part of the Kubernetes, but it is a useful custom resource that provides GitOps. So there exist a lot of custom resources that are already verified, and Kubernetes basically says that I have done my heavy lifting of adding standard resources, that is like replica set, services, ingress, etc. Now if you want to add other resources, that is custom resources, do it yourself. So doing yourself is a part of creating custom resource definition, custom resource, and custom controller. Another example would be, we know that there exists a concept of ingress, which exists to manage load balancer, meaning we don't need multiple load balancers and we can manage that by ingress with a single IP. So that is the function provided by ingress. Now there exists ingress controller, that is the brain that lets it work, or which is responsible for working of it. So it is same as that. Instead of Kubernetes already doing the heavy lifting of creating those resources and we just access it by creating YAMLs, etc., we have to do it ourselves by creating custom resource definition, then custom resource, and then custom controller, which is the brain that manages it. So custom resource is an object or a service or a resource, and it is a structured data, usually in a YAML format, that represent specific configuration or state we want to achieve. For example, istio, argo, etc. And mechanism behind it is extending the Kubernetes API server. By default, it is limited to default resources, and we extend that API server with custom resources with respect to our needs or our applications or software or organizations need. Meaning custom resource definition is usually prepared by senior or platform engineers, and it is like an unseen process for developers or DevOps engineers, and they only access those resources created using custom resource definition. For example, if it is istios, and DevOps engineers or developers access those custom resource definitions or those services or resources by YAML file of custom resource. So custom resource can be understood by remembering deployment file or ingress YAML file. So this is same. Custom resource is also like a YAML file to utilize the service created by custom resource definition. Now let's understand what is custom resource definition. A custom resource definition is the blueprint or the schema for our custom resource. Kubernetes doesn't know what database object looks like until we give it a CRD. The function, it tells the Kubernetes API server, hey, from now on, if someone sends us a YAML file labeled database, it should have these specific fields like a version or storage size, and here is how we validate them. The result, once we apply a CRD, the Kubernetes API expands. We now run kubectl get databases without getting an error. So custom resource definition is the blueprint to create a custom resource and to extend Kubernetes API server. By default, there are resources offered by Kubernetes. We expand the Kubernetes API server with custom resources. For example, here we are expanding API server for database, and once we create custom resource definition file and we apply the command, we would get kubectl get databases without getting an error. And we can create custom resource definition for many services or resources, custom resources offered by various certified and verified providers. For example, there exists istio, argo, and other services. We implement those or use those if we find that default resources are not enough and we need more for efficiency or stability or enhancement, etc. Now custom controller. A custom controller by itself is just dead data. It is a record in a database that doesn't actually do anything. The custom controller is the brain or the loop of the code that makes things happen. The logic. It runs in a continuous loop called reconciliation loop. It constantly checks two things: desired state, what we wrote in our custom resource. For example, if we wrote I want a Postgres database and actual state is what is currently happening in the real world. The action would be if the controller sees a custom resource asking for a database but no database exists, the controller executes the code to go out and build the database. So simply custom controller is the brain that needs to be there for custom resource and custom resource definition to work. For deployment and ingress, there exists ingress controller and deployment controller that acts as a brain or is a brain with respect to making things work. The logic behind custom controller is that it runs a continuous loop called reconciliation loop, and it constantly checks desired state and actual state. Desired state is the state that we want and we wrote in the custom resource, and actual state is what is currently happening. The action would be if controller sees a custom resource asking for a database but no database exists, the controller executes the code to go out and build that database. Custom controller typically involves using Go programming language to prepare it. Now summary would be component, that is CRD. The role of CRD is the setup. Real world example would be to define temperature setting as a valid concept. Component, custom resource, the role would be the input. We physically turning the dial to 22 degrees. Controller would do the action of noticing that it is cold and turning that into the temperature we defined in the custom resource. So CRD would be the concept or the service we create, and CR would be what we actually want from that CRD or to access that custom resource by specifying details of what we want to achieve. With respect to this example, it is 22 degrees, and controller is the actual brain that lets it execute and work. So that is it for our video today. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye.